Under the cold breath of a mountain dawn, traffic froze, not for a crash, but because a wild lynx refused to leave the road. Officer Dana Ellison thought it was just another call, until she saw the metal tag on its leg. This wasn't an animal in distress. It was a messenger, and what it led her to would rewrite everything she thought she knew. About wilderness, about trust, and about the tiny broken creature that would become a hero. Her name was Ember. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Morning in Fern Ridge, Montana came with a thin veil of mist and the scent of damp pine needles curling through the crisp air. It was the kind of quiet that only mountain towns knew soft, suspended, and slow to wake. But along a curve of Highway 27, just past the southern exit, that stillness had been broken. Traffic had stalled in both directions. Drivers were standing beside their cars talking in low tones, some pointing toward the road as if unsure what they had just seen. No one dared move forward. Officer Dana Ellison pulled her patrol SUV onto the gravel shoulder tires, spitting pebbles as she rolled to a halt. Her hand went to the radio clipped to her shoulder. Unit 4 Alpha on scene, she said. Highway 27, approximately 1 mile south of Marker 15. Traffic blockage confirmed. Assessing now. At 34, Dana was known for her calm presence and measured pace. She had served 12 years in the military police before returning to civilian life. Life in Fern Ridge suited her. The people kept to themselves. The town was tucked between forest and sky, and most calls involved nothing more serious than a bear in someone's compost bin. She stepped out into the cool morning air, adjusted her utility belt, and moved toward the cluster of drivers. Her boots echoed on the asphalt. People stepped aside. "What's going on here?" she asked. A tall man in a worn flannel shirt and ball cap jerked a thumb toward the center of the road. "It's an animal," he said. "Been running out there and then back again. Looks like a bobcat or something. It won't leave." Donna followed the line of his arm and saw it. A small lynx, not more than 6 or 7 months old, stood near the double yellow lines. Its coat was a smoky mix of gray and light brown, its ears tufted its body lean and tense. The animal darted a few steps forward, then retreated just as quickly to the shoulder. Then it came back out again, not aggressive, not confused. It looked purposeful. Dana frowned. She had seen wild animals panic on roads before, but this was different. This young lynx seemed to be trying to get someone's attention. Each motion it made was quick, uncertain, but somehow intentional, like a question being asked in a language no one spoke. She took a slow step forward, her hand instinctively resting near her holstered sidearm, not in fear, but habit. The lynx paused at the edge of the road and stared at her. It did not flee. Instead, it made a low, soft sound, neither threatening nor fearful. Then it turned, darted a few feet into the brush, stopped, and looked back. Dana stopped where the asphalt met gravel eyes narrowing. This wasn't random. It wasn't afraid. It was acting like it wanted something. Or someone. And for the first time in a long while, Dana Ellison didn't know what to do except to watch the woods and wait for the lynx to come back. The lynx was back again. Officer Dana Ellison watched from the edge of the road as the young animal, still leaned still, uncertain, stood just beyond the yellow line. Morning sun glinted off something metallic on its hind leg. It wasn't just her imagination. There was definitely a device strapped to it. She retrieved a pair of compact binoculars from her cruiser and focused in. What she saw made her stomach tighten. It wasn't a wildlife tracker. No collar, no ear tag, no bulky GPS unit slung under the belly. This was small, streamlined, and wrapped around the lynx's leg like a hiking band. A thin blue stripe marked its edge, and though the embedded light was off, the overall design was familiar too. Familiar. Dana lowered the binoculars and immediately reached for her radio. Dispatch Unit 4 Alpha. The animal is wearing what appears to be a personal emergency beacon, civilian grade, not wildlife issued. Requesting wildlife field support for ID confirmation. Copy 4 Alpha, came the response. Roading nearest specialist. Stand by. She didn't have to wait long. 25 minutes later, a white state wildlife truck pulled off the highway and parked behind her cruiser. Out stepped Andrew Miller, Regional Wildlife Field Specialist for Shiloh Pines. Andrew was in his early 50s, lean and outdoors, worn with the calm gait of someone used to long trails and unpredictable terrain. His khaki shirt was tucked into faded field pants and his ranger badge was clipped above his breast pocket. He walked with quiet confidence and nodded once in greeting. "You must be Ellison." "Dana," she said, shaking his hand. "Thanks for coming." He glanced toward the edge of the road. "This, the cat." "That's her," Dana replied. "She's been circling that patch of trees for the last half hour, not acting aggressive, just watching." Andrew raised his binoculars, squinted, and tracked the animal. It was still there, half crouched in the brush, its spotted coat blending with the forest floor. Then he saw it. "That's not one of ours," he said. "That device, it's a civilian locator beacon. Same type hikers register at state parks. It's meant to signal emergency crews." Dana folded her arms. "So, why is it on a lynx?" Andrew shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I can confirm this isn't a standard wildlife tracker. It's human-issued, and whoever it belonged to probably needed help." They both looked back at the animal's silent patient and still waiting. Andrew Miller's satellite phone chirped in his palm, a sharp digital note that cut through the rustling pines and distant hum of highway noise. He answered it quickly, stepping aside from the patrol cruiser, while Dana Ellison stood by, arms folded, eyes still trained on the lynx, crouched watchfully near the tree line. Ember hadn't moved far. The juvenile bobcat sat with her haunches just beyond a patch of ferns, half in shadow, half in sun. Her ears twitched now and then, but her eyes remained locked on the two humans on the roadside. Not as a threat, Dana thought. Not as prey. As if she were waiting. Andrew returned a few minutes later, his expression taut and businesslike. "Got confirmation," he said, slipping the phone into his pocket. "The beacon ID belongs to a man named Jack Morrow, 38 years old, listed as a registered researcher with the State Environmental Division. Lives alone outside Missoula, but had a permit to conduct field surveys here in Shiloh Pines." Dana blinked. "He's a scientist biologist," Andrew corrected. "Specializes in felids, lynx, cougars, bobcats. He's worked with our department before on rehabilitation projects. Quiet type, field-based. Doesn't come to meetings unless there's food involved." What was he doing here? Andrew scratched his chin. "Most likely tracking a previously released animal. We've been trying to reintroduce a few rescues back into controlled wild zones. Ember could have been one of them." Dana turned her gaze back to the young lynx. The name Ember sounded familiar. She let it roll in her mind, soft like a flickering candle. Somehow fitting. "You think this lynx knows where he is?" Andrew didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Ember's posture again, calm, but focused her tail, twitching slightly, as if signaling something unspoken. "I think he said at last she didn't come here by accident." Dana nodded, but her skepticism lingered. She had seen too many search and rescues that ended in silence. "Did Morrow file a return date?" "He was due back yesterday morning," Andrew said. "Checked in at the Eastern Ranger Station 3 days ago. planned a 72-hour survey route solo. Basic equipment tent, water purifier, the usual. No known health issues. Didn't sign out, and no one went looking until now. He's the kind of guy who works remote and off schedule. Missed check-ins aren't unusual, but this, Andrew motioned toward the Lynx. This is, Dana exhaled, resisting the instinct to push for more. She had learned painfully that wilderness moved at its own rhythm. The last time she rushed a decision in the field, someone ended up dead. She didn't talk about that day in Kandahar anymore, but it clung to her bones. A rustle of gravel behind her caught her attention. A battered green Subaru Outback had pulled up behind the wildlife truck. Out stepped a tall woman with sun-faded jeans and a backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. She was in her early 40s, with a round face, auburn hair pulled into a messy braid, and the quick stride of someone who disliked being late. She introduced herself as Marianne Lorne, a seasonal park liaison and trail specialist. I heard the call on the scanner, she explained. Jack's name caught my ear. He's a friend. Used to teach seminars with my husband back at the university in Bozeman. Dana offered a polite nod. You know his habits. Well enough, he's careful, never reckless. Marianne's voice faltered slightly. If he didn't check out, something's wrong. Andrew filled her in on the beacon, and she paled. That's a manual model. Jack would have had to remove it and place it somewhere, or on someone for it to activate. If it's on that Lynx, he put it there. Which meant Dana realized with a slow chill that he couldn't activate it himself. They all looked again at Ember. She now stood at the edge of the trees, her head slightly tilted, not fleeing, not frightened, waiting. Dana's voice was quiet. If this animal really is trying to lead us somewhere, what's the protocol? Andrew hesitated. We don't have one. Because this isn't supposed to happen, I'll follow her, Dana said. You coming? Andrew grabbed his field pack from the back of the truck. Marianne, after a second of hesitation, nodded and returned to her car for a satellite map. Ember turned, then, graceful, almost ghost-like, and stepped into the underbrush, disappearing into the shadows between trees. Dana checked her flashlight, her radio, and her sidearm. Then she stepped after the bobcat, unsure what waited in the trees, but knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't instinct. It was intention. The town of Fernridge sat quiet under a golden late-afternoon sky, the mountain air humming with insects, and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. The pine canopy around the western edge of town swayed in the breeze like old guardians whispering secrets. On a gently sloped hill at the edge of the forest stood a small cedar-shingled house, paint flaking at the edges, but surrounded by a lovingly tended vegetable garden and a crooked white fence. From a distance, it looked like the kind of place where nothing strange ever happened. But inside, something extraordinary stirred. 9-year-old Avery Lorne sat cross-legged on the rug in her room, hunched over a sketchpad. Her head was bowed in concentration, her hand moving with deliberate strokes as she shaded the curve of a feline ear. Her hair, dark blonde and long, had come loose from the braid her grandmother tied that morning, and strands fell across her freckled cheeks. She didn't brush them away. Avery didn't speak. Hadn't spoken for nearly 10 months. The trauma hadn't been physical, no accident, no injury. Just a single moment shattering and soundless. One winter evening, her parents had driven out on icy roads to get her a birthday cake. They never came back. Since then, the world had turned to silence in her mind. She heard things, understood everything, but the words stayed locked behind a door she couldn't open. Now, the girl with the silent tongue communicated through drawings. Pencil to paper, charcoal to canvas, ink on napkins. Her hands told stories her mouth would not. She didn't smile often, but when she drew animals, especially wild ones, there was a subtle peace in her eyes. Her grandmother, Eloise Lorne, watched from the doorway. She was a stout woman in her 70s with soft gray hair tied in a bun and large hands calloused from years of gardening. Eloise had taken Avery in without hesitation, giving up her quiet retirement to raise the girl as best she could. Her love was steady patient, and laced with sorrow she had lost a daughter, but more painfully she had watched her granddaughter drift far beyond the reach of comfort. Eloise entered the room slowly. "What are you working on?" "Love." Avery didn't answer, of course, but she turned the sketch pad so her grandmother could see. It was Ember. Again. The lynx's face was captured in breathtaking detail, its golden eyes' half-lidded expression, calm but alert. Around one of its hind legs, Avery had drawn a small band with a tiny blinking light. It was unmistakably the tracking device Dana had described on the radio earlier that day. Eloise's breath caught. She crouched beside Avery. "When did you see her?" Avery flipped back a few pages. The earlier drawings were simpler, more motion-focused Ember walking across a road. Ember crouched in the brush. Ember standing in front of trees that Avery had drawn from memory. One showed a small rectangular object on the ground with Ember standing beside it, like she was guarding it. "These are from before today," Eloise asked gently. Avery nodded. Eloise looked up at the bedroom window. It faced the woods. Then she stood, walked to the hallway phone, and dialed the non-emergency number for the sheriff's department. 15 minutes later, Dana Ellison stepped into the house. She had changed from her uniform into jeans and a plain navy jacket, her badge still clipped to her belt. Eloise met her at the door and ushered her in. "Thank you for coming. I know you're busy. I was heading off shift anyway," Dana replied. "You said you had something related to the lynx." "Yes, my granddaughter." Eloise gestured toward the hallway. "She's seen it. Not just today, several times, and she's been drawing it. You should see for yourself." Dana followed her into Avery's room and found the girl seated quietly, flipping to a clean page. Her sketch pad lay open on the bed, and beside it was a small stack of older drawings. Dana knelt to pick one up. It took her a moment to find her voice. This is Ember," she said slowly. "That's the lynx we've been tracking." Avery's pencil scratched softly on the new page. She was now drawing a cluster of trees, tall and thin. There was a clearing. In the center, a small object, a backpack, lay slanted at an angle, as if dropped. Just beside it, the faint impression of a human hand reaching out. Dana felt a chill work down her spine. She looked at Eloise. "She saw this, either saw it or dreamed it," Eloise said. "But I don't think this is imagination." Dana turned back to the girl. "Avery, can I ask you something?" Avery didn't look up, but she stopped drawing. "Has the lynx been near your house before today?" The girl nodded. "Did she leave anything behind, drop something?" Another nod. Avery reached for a shoebox under her bed, pulled it out, and handed it to Dana. Inside was a weathered, mud-caked keyring, clearly not old enough to be forgotten junk. A rusted whistle hung from one end. The initials JM were engraved on a small metal tag. Dana's throat tightened. "Jack Morrow." Eloise leaned forward. "You know the name?" Dana nodded. "That's the man we think the lynx is trying to lead us to." Silence. Then a sound that made the breath freeze in Dana's lungs. Avery cleared her throat softly and whispered a single word. "Follow." It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was spoken. Eloise gasped and covered her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. Dana, stunned, met Avery's gaze, and the girl gave the smallest, most imperceptible nod. A nod that said, "Go." And Dana knew exactly what she had to do next. The air in Shiloh Pines was growing colder by the minute, the late afternoon sun fading behind thick tree cover as Dana Ellison pushed aside a curtain of low-hanging branches. A single shaft of pale gold broke through the canopy and caught the tip of Ember's ear as the young lynx moved ahead, silent and steady. Dana followed close behind her steps, measured boots careful on the moss-covered ground. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every movement Ember made seemed to point them toward something. Behind her, Andrew Miller kept pace, eyes scanning not the cat, but the earth. His boots crunched softly on dry leaves as he traced the path Ember had chosen, not with doubt, but with quiet precision. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but the silence pressing in around them now felt like something watching, something waiting. Then Dana saw it. Just ahead, the forest opened into a small, uneven clearing. Scattered across the ground was the unmistakable debris of a struggle. A blue hiking backpack lay crumpled on its side, one strap ripped nearly clean off. Nearby, several torn food wrappers fluttered in the breeze, half buried in needles and dirt. A water bottle, cracked and leaking, rested beneath a low branch. And on the moss, not fresh, but dark and undeniable, was blood. Dana knelt beside the torn pack, her gloved fingers brushing over the fabric. "He was here," she said quietly. Andrew joined her, crouching low. "There's more," he said, nodding to the ground. "Footprints. Dragging. Look at the depth." He was moving slow, or pulling something. Dana followed the line of impressions that led away from the clearing. The trail sloped downward, disappearing into a natural break in the terrain, a shallow ravine choked with underbrush and rocks. Ember paused at the edge, looking back once as if to confirm they were still following, then disappeared down into the narrow path. Without a word, Dana moved after her, brushing aside hanging limbs and ducking low beneath twisted pine trunks. At the bottom of the slope, the air was cooler shaded by the angle of the ravine and the tall stones that jutted from its edge. Then she stopped. There, across a cluster of moss-covered boulders, a tree had fallen, its thick trunk stretched like a fallen bridge between two outcrops. The bark had been sheared on one side. Beneath it, partially hidden in the brush, was a man's body, Jack Dana whispered. Andrew was already moving. They scrambled across the uneven ground, slipping down beside the fallen tree. The man beneath it was unconscious, his leg pinned under a heavy knot of wood. His face was pale jaw, slack hair damp with sweat. He was breathing, but only just. Dana knelt beside him. He's alive. Ember stood on a nearby rise, watching in silence, golden eyes fixed on the scene below. The wind picked up as dusk settled deeper into the ravine, threading through the needles of the tall pines like a whisper from the mountains. The shadows stretched long across the mossy forest floor, painting everything in tones of gray and amber. Dana Ellison crouched beside Jack Morrow's battered body, watching for movement, for breath, for any sign that consciousness was returning. Andrew Miller, steady as always, had just finished applying a temporary splint to Jack's leg and was now checking his pulse. His hands moved with the quiet urgency of someone who knew how fast things could change in the field. He gave Dana a sharp nod. Vitals are weak but holding. Jack stirred. His eyelids fluttered like they were made of stone, then slowly opened to slits, revealing dull green eyes glazed with exhaustion and pain. His face was pale, dotted with scrapes, his beard flecked with blood and mud, but his mind was coming back into the room. Dana leaned in. "Jack, can you hear me?" He blinked once, then again. When he finally tried to speak, his voice was no more than dry air. Andrew pulled out a small canteen, twisted the cap, and carefully let a few drops of water touch Jack's cracked lips. The man swallowed slowly. Dana saw the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, like something invisible had finally let go. Jack tried again. "The tree. Lightning." Dana exchanged a quick glance with Andrew, who gave a small nod. "It hit close?" she asked gently. Jack closed his eyes for a moment before reopening them with more focus. Middle of the night. Storm came fast. I left the trail. Ember got spooked. His breath caught. She ran. I followed. A flash. Everything shook. He gestured weakly toward the tree. Didn't hear it coming. Ground split. Next thing I knew, it was on top of me. Andrew moved to check the dressing again, nodding along with the story. "You've been out here nearly 2 days, Jack." "I couldn't reach my beacon," Jack murmured. "It was in my pack. Crushed." Dana's voice lowered. "The one on Ember. That wasn't standard wildlife tagging, was it?" Jack gave a faint, tired smile. "No. I strapped the backup beacon to her harness before I passed out. Didn't know if it would stay on, but I knew she'd go somewhere." Dana watched the lynx from the edge of her vision. Ember stood on the ridge, still motionless, outlined by the last hints of fading light, like something carved from stone. "She found the road," Dana said quietly. "And us." Jack's voice wavered. "She remembered." Dana paused. Remembered what Jack blinked slowly. "She was just 3 weeks old when I found her. After the Pine Hollow fire, alone, smoke in her lungs." Paws burned. He looked past them into the treetops. "They said she wouldn't make it. But she did. She learned to walk again. I kept her close for 6 months more than we normally allow. I had to. She wouldn't eat unless I was near." His breathing slowed slightly as if the memory soothed him. "When she was old enough, I tried to rewild her. Taught her the sounds of the forest, the smells of deer, how to avoid roads. But I also taught her, if she was ever in trouble, find the road, find the people." Dana's jaw tensed. "She crossed that road for me," he added. She remembered. There was silence then. Not just the absence of sound, but something deeper. A reverence. Andrew stood quietly, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the lynx in the distance. Dana looked down at Jack again, at the man barely holding on, and felt something shift inside her. Jack Morrow wasn't just another scientist. He was someone who had taken wildness into his care, not to control it, but to trust it. Footsteps approached. A new figure appeared at the ridge above them. Ranger Elise Carver from the East Trail Station. Mid-40s, compact and suntanned, with cropped black hair and a radio on her chest. She was sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and used to moving quickly in terrain most wouldn't dare hike. "Ellison," she called softly. "Here," Dana responded. Elise nodded and slid carefully down the incline, stopping a few feet from them. "Extraction team's 5 minutes out. Helicopter will have to land at the ridge. We'll carry him up." Andrew nodded and gestured toward Jack's leg. "We'll need at least 2 to help stabilize the frame during the lift." "I brought 2 rangers," Elise confirmed. Jack's voice, weaker now, broke the air again. "Where is she?" Dana followed his eyes. Ember had disappeared. "She was up there a moment ago," Dana said. "But now—" "I hope she stays wild," Jack murmured, closing his eyes again. "But part of me wonders if that line between wild and not is thinner than we think." Neither Dana nor Andrew responded, but they both knew the answer. It had been 3 days since the rescue. Fernridge had returned to its sleepy rhythm, but something quiet and powerful had shifted beneath its surface. The townsfolk who had watched the lynx on the road that day now spoke of it in hushed tones, like a legend still forming. But for Dana Ellison, the story wasn't over yet. Not until she returned to one place she hadn't been able to stop thinking about. The Lorne house stood just beyond the east side of town, tucked behind a grove of birch trees that had already begun shedding golden leaves across the gravel driveway. Dana parked just past the crooked gate, stepping out into the brisk autumn air with her badge tucked away and her mind still lingering on the voice of a man nearly lost to the forest and the animal who had saved him. She knocked gently. Moments later, Eloise Lorne opened the door, still wearing her thick cardigan and a worn apron dusted with flour. Her gray hair was pinned up in the same tight bun as the last time Dana had seen her, and her eyes, pale blue, and always watchful, softened with recognition. Officer Ellison Eloise said with a small, knowing smile, "We were just thinking about you." Dana returned the smile. "You said I could come back. I was hoping I still could." Eloise stepped aside and waved her in. "Of course. Avery's in her room. She's been drawing all morning." The house smelled of baked apples and cinnamon. A fire crackled low in the hearth, and the warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the breeze outside. Dana followed Eloise down the hall to the same bedroom where she'd stood just days ago. The door was ajar. Inside, Avery sat cross-legged on her bed, her sketchpad balanced on her knees. The 9-year-old girl still hadn't said much, not since that one miraculous word. But her silence now felt different, less like a wall, more like a bridge still being built. Her hair was loosely braided, and she wore an oversized navy sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. Her cheeks were pink from concentration, and her small hands were stained faintly with charcoal. When Dana stepped in, Avery looked up, her eyes soft and gray, lit with recognition, not surprise, not fear, but something close to joy. Dana crossed the room slowly. "Hi, Avery." The girl gave a tiny nod and closed the sketchpad. Eloise stepped forward, voice gentle. "Why don't you show her honey?" After a brief pause, Avery handed the sketchpad to Dana, flipping it open to the beginning. Page after page, dozens of them were filled with Ember. Not just a lynx, but Ember specifically. The distinct facial markings, the way her tail curled when she sat, even the small notch near her right ear. But it wasn't only the likeness that struck Dana, it was the journey. Ember on the road. Ember pausing in the forest. Ember in front of a tree. Ember with something shining on her leg. Ember looking back over her shoulder as if calling someone forward. All the images matched the path Dana and Andrew had taken days before. Dana looked up, brow furrowed. "Did someone tell her where we found Jack?" Eloise shook her head slowly, not a word. Dana turned back to Avery. "You saw all this. Before it happened." Avery didn't answer. She didn't need to. Dana felt her pulse slow in that moment. Something deep, silent, and ancient was at work here, something she didn't understand but trusted. There was a knock at the front door, and Eloise excused herself to answer it. Dana stayed behind, flipping another page. The last drawing showed Ember curled up beneath a tree, eyes half closed, and a small figure, clearly Avery, reaching a hand toward her. Moments later, Eloise returned, holding the door wide. And there she was. Ember. The young lynx stepped cautiously inside her paws, nearly soundless against the old wooden floor. Her coat shimmered gold and ash in the firelight, and her golden eyes scanned the room with quiet focus. She looked thinner, perhaps, from days in the forest, but her gait was smooth, deliberate. Dana stepped back, slightly unsure. But Ember walked forward. She didn't go to Dana. She went to Avery. The girl sat very still, eyes wide, sketchpad sliding from her lap to the floor. Ember moved slowly with feline grace until her forehead brushed gently against Avery's hand. Avery let out a shaky breath. Her hand twitched, then lifted, and she placed it on the lynx's head. The moment held still and perfect until Avery whispered, voice trembling but clear, "Ember." Dana blinked. Eloise gasped softly behind her, a hand pressed to her mouth. The lynx gave a quiet chuff, then sat beside the girl tail, curling neatly around her paws. No one spoke. No one moved. And in that moment, the silence that had imprisoned Avery for nearly a year broke like morning light through the forest canopy. The first snow came earlier than expected. A gentle flurry drifted through the mountain air, settling like ash across the rooftops of Fernridge. Dana Ellison stood outside the new Wildlife Education Pavilion, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her field coat. The air smelled like pine and cold earth. Behind her, the gravel path crunched softly under the steps of families making their way toward the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The building had been completed just weeks ago, a modern cedar-paneled structure nestled at the edge of Shiloh pines. It wasn't large, but it was purposeful. The walls were covered with interpretive panels, hand-drawn illustrations, and even a few of Avery Lorne's most notable sketches, now framed in glass with her name printed beneath in clean, careful font. At only 9 years old, Avery had become something of a quiet symbol for the project. Since the day she had whispered Ember, her progress had astonished everyone. Dana turned as a familiar voice called her name. Andrew Miller, dressed in his Ranger formal greens for the first time in a decade, approached with a thermos in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He looked out of place in anything clean-pressed, but he wore the same sun-faded Ranger badge on his chest, and his smile was as warm as always. "You look surprised," he said, handing her the thermos. "Didn't think you owned anything without a tear in it," Dana replied, taking a grateful sip. "I had to borrow the shirt," he admitted, "from the office display mannequin." They both laughed quietly. The moment felt good. From inside the pavilion, the low hum of voices grew louder. Jack Morrow's name had been whispered through every conservation circle in the state since his rescue. Not for his credentials, though they were many, but for his story. Not everyone believed the tale of a lynx leading people to safety, but no one could deny the facts, the beacon, the rescue, the recovery, and now the unexpected ripple. Jack had healed faster than expected. The compound fracture had left him with a limp and a long scar, but it hadn't taken his drive. He had returned to Fernridge as soon as he could, moving into a small cabin near the pavilion, and returning slowly to his fieldwork. He was now standing inside, surrounded by young students pointing toward Ember's new enclosure, his voice steady, calm, and full of wonder. The enclosure wasn't large, but it was designed with care. A half-acre of mixed forest boulders climbing logs, and a stream carved through the center. It allowed Ember space to roam, to climb, to hide if she chose. But most importantly, it allowed her to stay. She had returned on her own weeks after the rescue, and after much debate among wildlife authorities, she had been granted a unique status ambassador animal. She could no longer survive completely wild, but she could teach, and that mattered. Dana stepped inside the main room just as Jack was finishing a sentence. "She's not here to be stared at," he told the gathered children, his voice quiet but firm. "She's here because we owe her our attention, because she crossed a line we didn't know could be crossed." A young boy raised his hand. "Did she really save you?" Jack paused. His eyes, still tired at the edges, met Dana's across the room. Then he looked back at the boy and nodded. She didn't know what saving meant, but she knew something was wrong, and she did something about it. That's all any of us can do. The boy blinked at that, then smiled. Dana wandered away from the group and moved to the observation window which overlooked the enclosure. The snow had begun to collect lightly on the outer rocks, creating a pale, glittering contrast against Ember's ash-gray coat. The lynx was resting on a broad stump, eyes half-lidded, head lifted into the wind. She looked strong. Not like a pet, not like a caged animal, but something in between, wild but watching. The door beside her opened gently. Avery, bundled in a navy pea coat, stepped inside her sketch pad, clutched under one arm. She was taller now, or maybe just standing straighter. Her speech was still minimal, her words few. But she no longer hid behind silence. Dana had visited her often since the incident, sometimes with Ember, sometimes without. The connection between the girl and the lynx was something no one could name. Avery stood beside Dana and opened her sketch pad to a new page. She began drawing without looking down, her eyes focused entirely on Ember. "She doesn't like loud," the girl whispered. Her voice was small but sure. Dana smiled softly. "Neither do I." They stood like that for a long while until the crowd inside began to move again. The ceremony was over. The ribbon had been cut. But the story was still growing. Outside, the townsfolk had gathered for warm drinks and quiet conversation. Teachers spoke with rangers. Parents held their children a little closer. And at the center of it all, a story lingered in the air like wood smoke. The lynx that stepped out of the woods and showed everyone that wild things don't always stay wild, and that maybe, just maybe, that's a gift. Dana stepped outside and let the wind hit her full in the face. It no longer chilled her. It opened something. Something she had kept locked away since Kandahar, since silence and guilt became her companions. But now, standing in the fading light, she let herself breathe deeper. Jack stood nearby, cane in one hand, steaming cup in the other. When he saw her, he nodded. No words needed. She nodded back. And behind them, Ember lifted her head, alert, calm, and watching as if to remind them all. The line between wild and human isn't a boundary. It's a bridge. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fanfare. Sometimes they come on 4 silent paws through the forest, carrying nothing but instinct and grace. Ember reminded us that even the wildest of creatures can be messengers of hope, of healing, of connection. Her journey wasn't just about saving a life. It was about showing us that the line between nature and humanity is thinner than we think. In moments when we are lost, when we feel alone or forgotten, perhaps God sends help in the most unexpected forms, not always with wings, but sometimes with fur. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to thank God for the quiet blessings in your life, the ones you didn't expect but needed most. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that hope still walks this earth. Leave a comment with the word Amen if you believe that even in silence, God speaks. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and pray that those who are lost physically, emotionally, or spiritually will find their way home. May God bless you and everyone you love.